I woke to the sound of waves breaking against the shore, steady and insistent, as if the ocean had climbed 30 floors to my bedroom window. For a dizzying moment, I believed it was real, that sound, after 12 years of silence had finally returned to me. Then another sound joined it, low and familiar. William's voice calling my name with the tenderness he had carried to his grave. I sat, bolt upright, heart pounding. The room was as silent as ever, heavy with the muteness I had grown used to. It had only been a dream, a cruel echo from memory. I pressed my palm against the cool sheets where William used to lie and tried to steady my breathing. On the nightstand sat the envelope that had arrived yesterday, cream paper with Hamilton Clinic embossed in blue across the top. My appointment, tomorrow morning at 7:30. The letters seemed to glow in the half-light, a promise I hadn't dared believe possible. Dr. Nathaniel Chen had called it experimental, but promising. A microchip, a regeneration protocol? A door back into the world of sound. No one knew but Nina. Nina Velasquez had been with me for nearly 3 decades, first as housekeeper, now more as companion than employee. She had stood beside me through the slow descent into deafness, patiently learning my faltering signs when others could not be bothered. I trusted her silence more than anyone else's words. When I showed her the clinic's letter, her hands had flown to her mouth, eyes brimming with hope. She promised secrecy without hesitation. I had not told Claire. My daughter lived 20 minutes away, close enough to visit often, yet somehow farther than ever. Since William's death, her visits came with papers to sign accounts, to review suggestions about what was too much for me to manage alone. I knew what she saw when she looked at me, a lonely, deaf widow with an empire of property she didn't deserve to keep. If I told her about the surgery, the questions would come. The pressure would come. I wanted this one thing to be mine. I rose, smoothed the wrinkles from my silk robe, and slid the envelope into the locked drawer of William's desk. The mahogany creaked, as if it too knew the weight of my secret. That was when I heard it. A faint vibration at the apartment door, then the muffled timbre of my daughter's voice. Not imagination this time, the new building intercom connected to my hearing aids, even when I wasn't wearing them. I pressed closer. Darren, she has to sign this month. Claire's voice insisted, sharp and hurried. Don't let her delay again. We can't keep waiting. I froze, blood surging through my veins with a heat that left me dizzy. It was not the warm concern of a daughter, but the clipped tone of a strategist closing a deal. Papers, signatures, deadlines always about the estate, the houses, the money. I backed away from the door before Nina could notice me listening. My fingers trembled as I tucked a strand of silver hair behind my ear. If Claire knew about the appointment, she would try to control it, just as she tried to control everything else. Perhaps she would frame it as concern, perhaps as love. But I had overheard enough to know better. When Nina entered with her tray of tea, I forced a smile and gestured toward the terrace. She opened the doors to let in the salt air, unaware that my world had shifted again. Tomorrow, I would step into the clinic, not only to restore my hearing, but to uncover the truth vibrating beneath my daughter's polished smile. And as the gulls wheeled above the coastline, I realized that silence might be the most powerful disguise I had ever worn. Silence is never truly silent. It hums. It presses against the walls of the mind until you think you hear something, only to realize it is only memory playing tricks. For 12 years, I lived in that suspended world, training myself to lip read, to nod when I caught only fragments, to smile when I guessed correctly. The loneliness was not just in the absence of sound, but in the erosion of intimacy. People stopped telling me secrets. They stopped speaking to me softly. They forgot I was once a woman who could answer the phone, laugh at a whispered joke, or listen to rain without seeing it. When I first lost my hearing, William was still alive. He would sit beside me on the terrace, hand resting lightly on mine, and repeat what others said until I caught the thread. His patience was endless, his voice, while I could still hear it, low and grounding. Together, we built Leighton Properties from a single derelict apartment building into a portfolio that stretched across 3 states. He was the face of our company, but I was the strategist, the one who turned numbers into growth, who knew which properties to hold and which to sell. Our marriage was built like our empire, stone by stone, every decision deliberate. When William died, the silence deepened in ways I had not anticipated. Without his voice bridging the gaps, I became an island even inside my own family. Claire tried at first, but her patience was thin. She had Darren by then, always glancing at his watch, always smoothing his tie, as if life were a boardroom. It was easier for them to scribble notes or raise their voices than to sit with me in my slow, careful world. This afternoon they arrived unannounced, as they often did. The elevator opened straight into my penthouse, and there they were. Claire in a camel-colored coat, Darren with a leather portfolio clutched under his arm. I was at the dining table with Nina finishing my tea. Mother Claire mouthed, exaggerating each syllable as though I were a child. She waved a set of documents in the air. Darren smiled tightly, then guided her toward me. I lifted my brows and gestured to the notepad that always lay nearby. Right. She sighed, but she obeyed, scribbling in quick strokes. Tax paperwork. Need your signature. I tapped the paper and then pointed to the portfolio. I wanted them to set it down to let me see it properly. Darren placed the folder on the table with deliberate care. As Claire pulled out the top sheet, Darren leaned close to her ear, his whisper sharp but audible. Get her to sign before the doctor calls again. My stomach clenched. I bent my head as though studying the page, careful not to let my eyes betray what I had heard. The document was covered in jargon: transfer of property assets, liability protections. Too complicated to digest at once, but I recognized enough these were not mere tax forms. Claire's pen was already poised, her smile thin. I reached for my notepad and wrote, "Need time. Will show Mr. Hale." I underlined Hale's name twice. Claire's lips tightened, and Darren's jaw flickered with irritation. He recovered quickly, nodding as if to humor me, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. They exchanged a glance that spoke more than words. Frustration, urgency, calculation. I closed the folder gently and slid it back across the table. My hand was steady, though my pulse thundered in my ears. For years I had feared silence would make me powerless, a woman at the mercy of those who spoke over her. Yet, in this moment, silence was my shield. They did not know I had heard. When they left, Nina cleared the cups, humming under her breath, a sound I could not yet hear but felt in the rhythm of her movements. I sat frozen at the table, staring at the polished wood. My daughter's voice, so sharp outside my door last night, now joined with Darren's whisper, circling in my mind like ghosts of sound. Whatever they were rushing me toward, it was not in my interest. And tomorrow, with the surgery, I would no longer be the woman they believed easy to manipulate. The Hamilton Clinic rose like a fortress of glass and white stone on the city's outskirts, discreet enough to be invisible to most and exclusive enough to keep its secrets sealed inside. Nina drove me before dawn, her hands gripping the wheel with a tension she tried to disguise as calm. We spoke little, my pen scratching only a few words on the notepad balanced on my lap. Tell anyone I'm in Chicago if they ask. She nodded, understanding the gravity without protest. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and polished steel. I was led to a private suite where the walls gleamed too white, too quiet. The silence pressed around me until Dr. Nathaniel Chen appeared, a slim man with kind eyes that softened the sterility of the room. His lips moved with deliberate clarity as he explained the procedure once more, And though I could not hear him, his presence carried an almost paternal reassurance. The microchip will act as a bridge. Nina signed haltingly beside him, translating his words. We will stimulate nerve regeneration. It is delicate, but the trials are promising. Promising. Such a thin word to balance against 12 years of silence. I nodded, masking the tremor in my fingers with a practiced grace. I had sat at boardroom tables negotiating millions. I had stood at William's side when banks doubted us and tenants threatened lawsuits. Yet this promise of sound unraveled me more than any financial risk. They prepared me swiftly, gown view electrodes. Machines blinked and hummed at the edges of my vision. I laid back on the narrow table, the surgical cap tugging at my silver hair. Nina squeezed my hand once hard before stepping aside. Dr. Chen leaned close so I could read his lips. Count backward from 10, Mrs. Layton. His eyes crinkled kindly, though I knew his focus was clinical precision. I closed mine. 10, 9, 8. The world dissolved into shadows, and with it came memory. I was back in the old townhouse on Beacon Street, the nursery painted in pale lavender. Claire, no more than 4, leaned close to my ear, her tiny lips brushing the air as she whispered something into my hair. A secret. I remembered nodding, smiling, pretending to hear. Her eyes had shone, believing I shared her confidence, though even then my hearing had been slipping away. I never knew what she said. Perhaps it was the name of her doll, or perhaps it was the first secret she ever trusted me with. It had vanished into silence, leaving me forever outside her whispered world. The anesthesia pulled me deeper. William's laugh joined the darkness, low and rich, echoing against the silence that had swallowed it years too soon. I reached for him, but he faded like the sound of waves dissolving on shore. Then nothing. When I surfaced again, light filtered through blinds in slanted stripes. My throat felt raw, my body heavy. For a moment, I thought the surgery was still a dream. Then a faint noise reached me. A drip. Slow, steady, metallic against plastic. My eyes flew open. Another sound, the rustle of fabric, subtle but undeniable, as Nina shifted in the chair beside me. The beeping of a monitor entered next, soft yet insistent, a symphony of machines I had not heard in 12 years. Tears spilled before I could stop them. The world was no longer mute. It was rough, muffled, fragile, as if underwater, but it was there. Sound. I turned my head toward Nina. She had dozed off chin, tilted a paperback slipping from her lap. The paper made the faintest whisper as it slid to the floor, and I gasped at the miracle of it. My own breath sounded strange, hoarse, and uneven, but audible. The silence had been broken. And I knew, as surely as I had known anything in my long life, that I would not tell Claire. Not yet. The ride back from Hamilton Clinic was filled with sounds I had long forgotten, the steady purr of the engine, the faint tick of the turn signal, even the scrape of Nina's rings against the steering wheel. Each noise struck me like a small miracle, and yet I held my composure, as though I had not just been reborn into a world of sound. When we reached the penthouse, Nina carried the overnight bag inside and shut the door firmly behind us. Then she turned to me, eyes bright with tears. "You can hear me," she whispered, as if afraid the walls might be listening too. I nodded, pressing my fingers to my lips. Yes, but no one else must know. Not yet. Her shoulders sagged with relief, but also with the weight of the secret she had just inherited. "I'll keep it," she said, voice trembling. "I swear it." For the first time in years, I laughed aloud, a strange, uneven sound, almost foreign to my own ears. "We'll keep playing our roles," I told her. "Right sign pretend. Nothing changes. On the surface." 2 days later, the elevator opened with its familiar chime, and Claire swept in with Darren close behind. I slipped the small hearing aids from my ears and tucked them into the pocket of my cardigan before they reached the foyer. By the time they entered the living room, I was the same silent mother they had always known, smiling politely with pen and notepad. Ready. Mother Claire mouthed, placing a quick kiss on my cheek. Her perfume hung too heavily, filling the room with its sharp sweetness. Darren trailed her leather folder under one arm. Expression practiced into charm. They settled across from me on the cream sofa. Claire scribbled on the pad she knew I would reach for. Just wanted to check in. How are you feeling? I wrote back quickly. Fine. Tired. Thank you for coming. They both smiled, though their eyes slid toward each other almost instantly. Darren leaned slightly toward her, his voice pitched low. Did you tell her about the transfer? Claire shook her head. Not yet. We have to time it right. My heart stilled. I lowered my gaze to the pad, feigning concentration, as I wrote T and passed it to Nina, who disappeared into the kitchen. The whispers continued. The realtor already showed the place to the couple from Portland. Darren murmured. They loved it. Said they'd pay cash. The cottage, Claire's tone was sharp, almost anxious. He nodded. Yes. But we need her signature on the deed before we can close anything. My pen pressed so hard against the paper it nearly tore. The cottage, our first home. William's pride. The gardens he had planted with his own hands, the attic where Claire had painted her first canvases, the porch where we had celebrated birthdays with sparklers. And they had shown it without a word to me. I forced my hand to remain steady as I scribbled on the notepad in front of me. Lovely to see you. Dinner soon, Claire read it and smiled broadly, too broadly. Of course, she said loudly, as though speaking to someone hard of hearing. Dinner next week. They stayed another half hour, filling the air with small talk, meant to look like care. But I heard the undercurrent, their impatience, their strategy. When they finally left, I walked to the window and pressed my hand against the glass, staring down at the city I had conquered once with William. Behind me, Nina re-entered with untouched tea. You heard them, she said quietly. I nodded. My throat ached with unshed tears, but my voice was steady. Yes, and now I know just how far they are willing to go. After Claire and Darren left, I opened the bottom drawer of William's desk and pulled out a leather-bound notebook I hadn't touched in years. It had once been my journal, a place for business notes and travel sketches. But now it would become something else entirely, a ledger of deceit. I wrote the date carefully across the top of the page, then recorded every word I had overheard. Darren's whisper about the transfer, Claire's hesitance, the mention of the Portland couple who had already seen the cottage. Each detail was pressed into the page with a steady hand, though my heart was racing. I knew from William's years in business that memory could be twisted, recollections dismissed. Paper, however, could stand in court. When I finished, I slid the notebook into the hidden compartment at the back of the desk. William had shown it to me once, proud of his carpenter's ingenuity. Every empire, he'd said, needs a place to keep its truths safe. Now it was mine to protect not just our properties, but the truth of what our daughter and her husband were doing behind my back. Still, I could not do it alone. I thought of the one man William had trusted beyond any banker or board member, Aldous Hale, our estate attorney. He had represented us since our first apartment purchase, gray-haired even then, with a mind like a blade. 2 mornings later, I asked Nina to drive me to his office in the historic district. The building was quiet, lined with mahogany and old leather books, a place where time itself seemed reluctant to move forward. Mr. Hale rose from behind his desk as I entered his frame, thinner now, but his handshake still firm. Mrs. Layton, he said, voice low and deliberate. It has been too long. I handed him a slip of paper I had written the night before, confidential. No one, especially Claire, must know I am here. his eyes sharpened, reading me with the instinct of a man who had shepherded many families through storms. He nodded once. "You have my word." I sat across from him and slowly revealed what I had overheard, choosing my words carefully, describing Darren's whispers, Claire's silence, the mention of the cottage. Then, trembling slightly, I told him the truth about the surgery, that my hearing had returned, but I intended to keep it hidden. He leaned back, fingers steepled. "You are wise not to reveal it. Yet," he said, "they will show themselves more clearly if they believe you cannot hear." From his cabinet, he withdrew several folders. "I have been monitoring certain irregularities. With your permission, I will show you." I gestured for him to continue. He slid across a file filled with copies of loan documents. My eyes scanned the signatures, and my breath caught. There in blue ink was Claire's unmistakable handwriting, curved letters I had once watched her practice as a child. She had co-signed a series of loans with Darren. The collateral listed beneath chilled me several of my paintings, part of the collection William had given me over the years. Watercolors from Paris oils from local artists he admired. Pieces chosen for love, not profit. "Risky ventures," Hale murmured. "Most of them already in default. If repayment is demanded, your assets are at stake. They used your name, your art, without informing you." I touched the page where Claire's name was written, my hand trembling. Betrayal had a weight to it, heavier than stone. But beneath it, I sensed something else: desperation. This was not just greed. Claire was drowning, entangled in Darren's reckless hands, and she had chosen to pull my legacy down with her, rather than confess the truth. I closed the folder and met Hale's gaze. "Keep digging," quietly. As I left his office, the notebook in my bag felt heavier, filled not only with their words, but with their signatures, their choices, their shadows. Each page was proof, and each proof was a wound. That night, alone in the penthouse, I opened the ledger once more and added a new line in bold strokes. "Betrayal wears my daughter's handwriting." I needed space to think, and the city penthouse, for all its luxury, had grown suffocating. So I asked Nina to pack a small bag and drive me north to Maine, to the cottage William and I had bought in our early years. It had stood as our refuge long before the empire, a place where money mattered less than sea air and quiet evenings by the fire. When we pulled into the gravel drive, the first thing I noticed was the sound, the delicate clinking of the wind chimes. William had hung from the porch beam. They had spun silently in the breeze for 12 years, and now their soft, uneven melody washed over me like a benediction. My throat tightened as I stepped out of the car. The world was returning to me, note by fragile note. Inside the cottage smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Dust had gathered in corners, but it welcomed me as if I had never left. I ran my fingers over the kitchen counter where Claire had once sat, coloring with crayons, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Those afternoons seemed impossibly far away now, as though they belonged to another lifetime, another mother and child. On the hall table lay the leather-bound guest book, a tradition William had started so we could remember each visit. I opened it idly, expecting only the loops of my own handwriting from years past. Instead, newer entries met me written in Claire's tidy script. July 14th, meeting with realtor at 11. Possible buyers interested in coastal properties. August 2nd, toured cottage with young couple. Said they'd be in touch soon. September 9th, follow up with agent. Need mother's signature finalized. The ink was fresh, the words brisk and businesslike. Not one note of sentiment, not one line about memories or meaning. Just transactions, as if this place were nothing more than another unit in her portfolio. I closed the book with shaking hands. My knees felt weak, so I sat on the arm of the sofa, staring at the empty fireplace. The betrayal was deeper here than in any ledger. This cottage was the heart of William's and my life together, a sanctuary filled with laughter storms weathered, and Claire's first steps across the creaking floorboards. She was selling not just a house, but the very marrow of our history. Later, while Nina unpacked, I stepped outside to breathe the salt air. Old Mr. Callahan, our neighbor of 40 years, ambled up the drive leaning on his cane. His voice carried clearly in the breeze, gruff but warm. "Good to see you back, Marion. Haven't seen you in a while." I nodded and smiled, gesturing for him to go on. He leaned closer, lowering his tone, though it still reached me. "Your daughter was here a few weeks back showing the place around. Told me the sale was practically imminent. Said it was time to let go of old things." My heart gave a sharp twist. I forced a polite smile, thanked him, and retreated before he could see the tears rising in my eyes. Inside, I closed the door and pressed my forehead against the cool wood. The wind chimes tinkled faintly outside, the sound sweet and merciless. I sank onto the sofa and let the tears come, silent tears that blurred the room until it was only shadows. But after a time, grief gave way to something harder. I wiped my face and straightened. If Claire believed she could erase me with signatures and whispered deals, she was wrong. This house was not hers to sell. Not yet. Not ever. I opened the guest book again, placed my pen on a blank page, and wrote one line in bold strokes. October 3rd. Returned home. Listening now. The words steadied me. Whatever came next, I would not surrender. The following Thursday, I hosted the weekly dinner at my penthouse. It was a tradition I had kept alive after William's death, though it had long since lost its warmth. Now, it served a different purpose, a stage where I could play my role of the silent matriarch while listening to the play behind the play. Claire arrived first, Darren just behind her. She kissed my cheek lightly, mouthing "Mother." "You look wonderful." Darren followed, with his polished smile, carrying a folder tucked beneath his arm. I had already slipped the hearing aids into my cardigan pocket, ensuring they would see only the familiar woman who required notes and exaggerated gestures. We sat around the long table, Nina serving the roast I had insisted she prepare. Claire dutifully picked up the notepad beside her plate and scribbled, "How are you feeling?" The words were simple, stripped of nuance. She slid it toward me as if addressing a child learning to read. I smiled and wrote back, "Fine, tired, happy you came." She nodded brightly while Darren leaned closer to her, his whisper slicing through the charade. "She's like a child," he murmured. "Easy target." I kept my expression serene, cutting a piece of meat, nodding at the conversation I pretended not to catch. My fork trembled only slightly in my hand. As the meal went on, their whispers grew bolder. "She can't follow half of this," Darren said once when Claire asked about the accounts. "Just steer her gently." After dessert, Darren pulled the folder from beneath his chair and laid it on the table. "Just a few routine documents," he said loudly, enunciating for my benefit. He slid the top page toward me, tapping the signature line with his pen. Claire added quickly, "Health consent forms." Nothing complicated. I reached for the page, scanning it under lowered lashes. The words blurred in the low light, but I recognized terms durable power medical authority that did not belong in any routine consent. My chest tightened. They were trying to slip the noose around my neck under the guise of care. I lifted the pen, poised to sign, letting the ink hover over the line. Darren leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Claire held her breath. The elevator chimed. Moments later, Aldous Hale stepped into the dining room, his gray suit impeccable, his presence as sharp as a blade. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Layton, you asked me to review any new paperwork. Shall I take this with me?" I lowered the pen without a stroke of ink. Relief surged through me, though I kept my smile gentle, my expression as calm as ever. "Yes," I said, slowly projecting the uneven voice they expected. Review later. Darren's face flickered. First irritation, then a mask of good manners. Of course, he said quickly. We only wanted to help. Hale gathered the documents with steady hands, tucking them into his briefcase. I'll return them once I've had time, he said, eyes narrowing ever so slightly in Darren's direction. Claire forced a laugh, brittle and thin. Well, Mother always was careful with details, she said. That's where I learned it. I set down my pen and folded my hands in my lap. The performance was complete. They still believed me, half blind, half lost in silence. But now, I had seen enough of their act to know precisely how far they were willing to go. And I knew, as Hale closed the briefcase with a click, that the game had only just begun. After Claire and Darren left, the penthouse felt unnaturally still. The roast sat half-eaten on the table, wine glasses ringed with fingerprints that seemed like stains of false affection. I gathered my notebook, intending to record every whispered word I had captured, when Nina approached from the doorway, her face tense. Mrs. Layton, she began softly, glancing toward the closed elevator doors, as if to be sure the couple had truly gone. There's something I should tell you. I set the notebook down. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her apron, unusual for a woman who usually moved with the confidence of long habit. Go on, I urged. She reached into her pocket and drew out a slim recorder, the sort students use in lectures. She set it gently on the table between us. For weeks now, I've been keeping this nearby when they visit. I couldn't bear the way they spoke about you, as if you were a burden, as if they were entitled to everything you've built. Tonight, while I cleared the plates, I caught Darren. He was bragging to Claire, saying he would lock the POA Friday. I thought, you might want proof beyond your word. I stared at the little machine, my breath catching. Proof. The very thing I had begun to build in my ledger. My chest swelled with both gratitude and sorrow. I had expected loyalty from William, from family, but here it was given freely by the woman who had once been hired to polish floors and fold linens. I reached across the table, covering her trembling hand with mine. Nina, you have done more for me than my own daughter. Her eyes glistened. I could not stay silent. But why haven't you told them about your hearing? It would stop their scheming at once. The words pressed against the wall I had built around my secret. I drew a slow breath and let the truth spill out. Because Nina, I can hear again. The surgery worked. For a moment she froze, then her lips parted in wonder. You mean you've heard me all along? You've heard them? Yes. My voice wavered with both shame and triumph. Every word, every whisper, meant to stay hidden. And if they knew, they would simply become more careful. But as long as they believe me deaf, they reveal themselves. Their greed is bared in the shadows they think I cannot see. Nina sank into the chair opposite me, shaking her head as though trying to absorb the enormity of it. So this is why you've been writing everything down, why you let Mr. Hale interrupt. You're setting a trap. I nodded slowly. Not for vengeance, but for clarity. I need to know how deep their betrayal runs. If it is only Darren, or if my Claire is truly lost to me. Her voice steadied, taking on a firmness that surprised me. Then let me help. I'll keep recording. I'll act as though nothing has changed. Whatever they say, whatever they do, I'll bring it to you. I looked at her. This woman who had mended my clothes, held me through William's funeral, sat by me in the worst hours of silence. It will be dangerous, Nina. If they suspect, they won't, she cut in. I've been invisible to them for years. Just the housekeeper. They forget servants have ears. Emotion tightened my throat, but I managed a nod. Then we moved forward together. You keep your recorder. I'll keep my ledger. And to the world, I remain deaf. Nina reached across the table, clasping my hands firmly. On my life, Mrs. Layton, I swear I won't betray you. The oath hung in the air between us, more binding than ink. Outside the window, the city lights flickered against the glass, indifferent witnesses to the pact we had forged. And I knew with a certainty that cut deeper than blood that I now trusted her more than my own daughter. The morning after Nina's oath, I summoned Mr. Hale to the penthouse. He arrived with his leather briefcase and the quiet authority of a man who had weathered more than one storm. We met in William's study, the air still heavy with his presence. Shelves lined with the books he had once read aloud to me when I could still hear his voice. Hale spread a series of documents across the desk. "We must move quickly," he said, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "I recommend we revoke all existing powers of attorney effective immediately. We'll establish new trusts beyond Darren's reach. Only you and I will know the full structure." I nodded steady, despite the ache in my chest. Signing my name felt like reclaiming something I had surrendered too easily. Each stroke of the pen was both protection and indictment, a silent declaration that I no longer trusted my daughter with what William and I had built. When the last document was sealed, Hale folded his hands. "This will safeguard you, Marion. But I warn you, if Darren has already leveraged assets under Claire's signature, we may find damage difficult to undo." I glanced at the notebook tucked in the drawer, where every overheard word now lived in ink. Then we prepare for whatever comes. That night, when the penthouse had grown quiet, I sat at William's old desk and began to write a letter to Claire. It was not one she would see now, but perhaps one she might read when all illusions had shattered. "My dearest Claire," I wrote, "I do not know if you remember the cottage summers the way you once pressed shells into my hand and told me the ocean whispered through them. I could not hear it then, though I pretended I could. I have pretended too much with you. If this letter finds you, it means the truth has broken us. Yet I want you to know I loved you long before money clouded our days. I loved you when we had only one house, one car, and William's laughter to keep us steady. Whatever you choose, you remain my daughter." Tears blurred the words, but I forced myself to sign and seal the envelope. I tucked it inside the hidden compartment with my ledger. If I lost her forever, at least she would know the truth that silence had never erased. 2 days later, Hale called me back to his office. His voice was grimmer than I had ever heard. "We found something." He placed a stack of loan papers before me, heavier than any document had a right to be. At first glance, they looked ordinary, another of Darren's risky ventures. Then, my breath caught. The signature at the bottom was not mine nor Claire's. It was William's. I stared at the familiar hand, the flourish of the W I had watched him sign countless times on checks, letters, and deeds. Except William had been gone nearly 8 years when this paper was dated. Hale's expression hardened. Darren forged it. He must have copied old records, confident you would not detect it. I touched the page, my hand trembling. To steal money was one thing. To steal my husband's name, his dignity, was another. It felt like a desecration, as if Darren had reached into the grave and dragged William into his schemes. Anger burned through my grief, sharper than any sound I had ever heard. I lifted my gaze to Hale. "This cannot stand. We protect what remains." He nodded solemnly. "We will gather every record, every forgery, every lie, and when the time comes, you will have more than whispers. You will have proof." I closed the folder with care, the way one might close a coffin. Then I rose, steadied by a resolve that felt as unyielding as stone. And I knew the silence I wore like a mask would soon become my weapon. I drove to the cottage with Nina on a crisp morning, the air carrying the salt of the Atlantic. Though Hale's discovery of Darren's forgery burned inside me like an open wound, I chose to focus on the house that had always steadied me. Its cedar shingles, weathered by decades of storms, felt like a second skin. Here, William's laughter seemed almost present, mingling with the rhythm of the waves. We had barely settled in when a car pulled into the drive. Claire stepped out immaculate in her tailored coat, followed by a man in a sharp suit carrying a leather binder. My stomach tightened. A realtor. I motioned to Nina. Not a word I whispered before slipping the hearing aids into my pocket. By the time Claire opened the door, I was already seated in the parlor, hands folded, playing my part. "Mother," she said loudly as though addressing a child. "I didn't expect you here. This is Mr. Reynolds. He's helping us with options." Reynolds smiled politely, clearly briefed on my supposed deafness. "Lovely home, Mrs. Layton. Fine craftsmanship. I'm sure prospective buyers will love it." My jaw ached from holding still. Claire walked him through the room, speaking in that bright, rehearsed tone. "This space could easily be renovated into a modern kitchen. The view is our strongest selling point." Nina lingered near the hall, her hand clenched around the recorder in her pocket. I kept my face blank, feigning ignorance, though every word sliced me open. When they reached the living room again, Reynolds opened his binder. "Shall we review offers?" "Mrs. Layton." That was the moment. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, and placed my hands on the back of William's old chair. For years I had let my silence shield me. Now I let my voice cut through it. "This house," I said, my words sharp and steady, "is not for sale." The room froze. Claire's mouth fell open. Reynolds blinked his pen, hovering midair. Mother Claire stammered, her face blanching. You can hear." I met her gaze without flinching. "I can hear every word you've spoken. Every scheme you thought was whispered in safety." Before she could answer, Nina stepped forward, producing the recorder. She pressed play. Darren's voice spilled into the room, clear and damning. "We'll lock the POA Friday. Once she signs, the cottage is gone. She'll never know until the papers are filed." Reynolds looked horrified, his professional mask shattering. He closed his binder with a snap and muttered, "I believe I'll excuse myself." Within seconds, he was out the door, leaving silence in his wake. Claire's hands shook. "Mother, you don't understand. Darren." He pressured me. I raised a hand to stop her. "Do not hide behind him. Your name is written beside his on the loans. Your words are in that guest book. And now your betrayal rings in my ears as clearly as any bell." She reached toward me, but I stepped back. "This cottage is the heart of our family, your father's heart. And you would have sold it for cash without a word to me." Her eyes filled with tears, though, whether from shame or fear, I could not tell. She whispered, "I didn't think you'd ever know. That I said coldly was your mistake." The air between us thickened until she dropped her gaze, unable to meet mine. Nina turned off the recorder, tucking it back into her apron. I looked out the window at the sea waves rising and falling, as they had long before us, as they would long after, and I knew this battle had only begun. The cottage walls had not held such silence since the day William died. Claire sat hunched on the sofa, her hands twisting a tissue into shreds, while Nina hovered near the doorway like a sentry. My daughter's face, still lovely beneath the tension, seemed younger than her 42 years, like the child who used to beg me to braid her hair before school. But the words spilling from her mouth were not a child's pleas. They were defenses, brittle and desperate. "Mother, you have to believe me," she cried. Darren pushed me. He said we needed the money, that it was only temporary, that you'd never notice. I didn't know it would go this far. Her voice cracked, and the tears came harder. She pressed her palms against her eyes, shaking her head, as though trying to erase her own part in the deception. I watched her, my heart twisting with both pity and suspicion. I wanted to believe she had been coerced, that the Claire I raised would never so easily betray me. But the signatures on the loans were hers. The notes in the guest book were hers. And the realtor's humiliation a few minutes earlier was thanks to her arrangements. "You signed the papers," I said evenly. "You opened the door to the realtor. You put my paintings at risk. Was Darren holding your hand when you wrote your name? She flinched as though struck. I was afraid of losing him, she whispered. Afraid of him walking away if I didn't cooperate. I thought I could control it. Keep it small. Keep it from hurting you. Before I could answer, the cottage door banged open. Darren stormed in, face flushed, eyes blazing. What the hell is this? He barked, humiliating me in front of a realtor, playing games with recordings. You're making a grave mistake, Marion. Nina stiffened, but I lifted a hand for her to stay calm. I stood, facing him squarely. The mistake, Darren was underestimating me. He jabbed a finger at the table where the documents lay. You think this will hold up? I'll bury you in lawsuits. Defamation, interference, elder abuse, you name it. You want a war, I'll give you one. I held his gaze without flinching. Try if you like, but I have every whisper you uttered on tape. I have Mr. Hale restructuring my estate as we speak. Your forged signatures will land you in prison long before they strip me of anything. For a moment, his bravado faltered, the threat in his eyes tempered by the first glint of fear. He turned to Claire, his voice sharp. Are you just going to sit there? Tell her she can't do this. But Claire's face was pale, her body shaking. Darren, she whispered, please stop. I stepped closer, voice low but steady. Claire, you have a choice. You can sever yourself from him, pay back what you owe and seek the help you clearly need, or you can follow him into ruin. I will not shield you again. She looked between us, torn in two, her tears streaking down her face. Therapy, she echoed as though the word were foreign. Yes, I said. Therapy, financial counseling, accountability. If you want any part of this family of my trust, you must face what you've done. If not, Mr. Hale will ensure the law does. Darren laughed harshly. She's bluffing. She won't destroy her own daughter. I met his eyes, my voice iron. Don't test me. The room held its breath. Claire crumpled into fresh sobs, but something in her expression shifted, less denial, more recognition of the precipice she stood on. Darren, realizing the tide had turned, muttered a curse and stormed back out the door, rattling in his wake. The silence he left behind was deeper than any storm. Claire buried her face in her hands, while I stood rooted. William's chair at my back, the house braced against betrayal. And I knew the next battle would not be fought with Darren, but with the broken pieces of my daughter. The weeks that followed Darren's outburst at the cottage unfolded like the slow, deliberate turning of winter. The man who had once strutted into every room with polished charm and expensive suits began to unravel in full view of the world. His lawsuits, filed in a flurry of bravado, were dismantled one by Mr. Hale's meticulous counter-arguments. The forged signatures, the whispered recordings, the false contracts all became evidence of his deceit. Judges, scolded creditors circled, and soon even his allies abandoned him. Then he was gone. No forwarding address, no goodbye to Claire. Just gone like a storm that had screamed itself out and left wreckage behind. Rumors drifted back Dubai, perhaps. Maybe the Caribbean. Always chasing the next wealthy mark. I did not waste time following his trail. Some absences are blessings in disguise. Claire's life, once so gilded, collapsed in his wake. The glossy apartment she had shared with Darren was repossessed, the luxury cars reclaimed by creditors. She moved into a small flat on the edge of town, its peeling paint and narrow stairwell, a far cry from the world she had grown accustomed to. I visited once under the guise of Nina delivering groceries. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, the curtains thin, the silence oppressive. Claire tried to smile, but it broke around the edges. It's temporary, she said, though. Her voice trembled. I'll find my footing again. I nodded, letting her keep that shred of dignity. But inside, my heart ached with a mixture of sorrow and hard-earned resolve. She had chosen Darren's path, and now she walked its consequences. I would not shield her again. Meanwhile, I maintained my facade in public. At dinners, galas, and the few social events I still attended, I carried my notepad, nodded politely, and let the world believe I was deaf. It was safer this way. People spoke freely when they thought their words evaporated into silence. I gathered more truth in those rooms than I ever had when I was the one speaking. But in private, the new sounds of my life became both comfort and anchor. The kettle's whistle in the kitchen, the creak of floorboards when Nina moved in the night, the gulls calling across the bay when I returned to the cottage alone. Every note reminded me that I had been given not just a miracle, but a second purpose. I began sketching the outlines of something William would have understood instinctively: a foundation. Not another real estate venture, not a charitable front for wealth management, but a genuine lifeline. A center for auditory restoration modeled after the Hamilton Clinic, funded entirely through the fortune Darren had tried to strip from me. Hale arranged the legal scaffolding. Nina accompanied me to meetings where I posed as silent, watching men underestimate me, while I silently took in every careless aside. When the first contracts were signed for property acquisition, I felt William's presence more vividly than ever. He had always said money was a tool dangerous in the wrong hands, powerful in the right ones. I intended to use it to give others the gift I had been given: the return of sound and the return of choice. Yet even as the plans grew, I could not ignore the cold truth: my daughter was adrift. Claire visited less often now, ashamed perhaps, or unwilling to face me without Darren to prop her up. When she did come, her clothes were simpler, her voice quieter. She no longer spoke of investments or property, but of bills and exhaustion. Each time she left, I found myself standing at the window, torn between the instinct to rush after her and the knowledge that only consequences would carve the truth into her heart. The winter outside deepened, the city blanketed in frost. Inside, I worked late at William's desk, the sound of my pen scratching against paper, steady as a heartbeat. The foundation's charter grew page by page, while the letter I had written to Claire remained sealed in the hidden drawer. And I knew, as I pressed my signature onto the final draft of the foundation's mission, that the next season would test whether blood could survive the storm it had summoned. It was nearly midnight when the buzzer rang. Nina stirred from her room, but I rose first, robe wrapped tightly around me. The city outside was hushed snow, falling in slow sheets against the glass. I pressed the intercom and heard only a faint sob before the voice came muffled and raw. "Mom, it's me." I opened the door. Claire stood there, her coat unbuttoned, hair damp with melted snow eyes, rimmed red as though she'd been crying for hours. She looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the polished armor she had always worn. "Mom," she whispered again, stepping inside. Her voice cracked. "I need help. Not money. Just help." I guided her into the living room, where the fire still smoldered low. She sank into the armchair William had favored, curling into herself like a child. I sat opposite her, with my notepad, the mask of silence still firmly in place. I lifted the pen and wrote one word. How she stared at the page, then gave a broken laugh. Even now, she murmured, "I can't say things to your face unless you make me spell them out." Her hands trembled in her lap. "But maybe that's safer. Maybe I need you to just listen." So I did. I reached for the small recorder hidden in my robe pocket, clicking it on beneath the folds of fabric. Then I leaned back, meeting her eyes, and let her speak. "I don't know who I am without him," she began. "Darren made every decision, every plan. I hated him for it, but I also let him. It was easier to follow than to fight. And when he turned everything toward you, your money, your house, I told myself it was just temporary, that he would calm down once we were stable." Her voice faltered, then steadied again, softer this time. "But I knew I knew he was using me, and I still stayed. I thought I couldn't survive without the life he gave me. The cars, the dinners, the way people looked at us. She buried her face in her hands, and now it's gone. And all that's left is this ache, loneliness, guilt, fear that I'm exactly what you think I am. I kept my face calm, though my chest ached. For years I had dreamed of hearing my daughter speak honestly, and now the words spilled out like a confession. She lifted her head, eyes shining with tears. I don't want your money, Mom. I just want to feel like your daughter again, like I haven't lost you completely. I picked up the notepad and wrote, "Always my daughter." I slid it across to her, my fingers brushing hers. She clutched the paper as if it were proof, pressing it to her chest. Her sobs came harder, then shaking her body. I wanted to rise to gather her in my arms, but I stayed still, letting her grief carve its path. The recorder caught every word, every tremor, every truth I had needed to hear spoken aloud. When at last she calmed, she wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered, "but I'm asking anyway." I reached for her hand, holding it tightly. My silence, both mask and answer. She closed her eyes, leaning into my touch as though it were the first anchor she had felt in months. And as the fire burned lower, I knew the choice before me would not be about proof or betrayal, but about whether forgiveness could survive when trust had already been broken. The snow kept falling outside, blanketing the city in white, as if daring us to start again. The morning after Claire's late-night visit, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes swollen, but her posture steadier than I had seen in months. Nina had set coffee between us and quietly excused herself, leaving the room hushed except for the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. I placed my notepad in front of me, but didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I spoke softly, letting the words hang like fragile glass. "Claire, I need to tell you something. Not everything, not yet, but enough." Her eyes widened at the sound of my voice. She blinked as though trying to decide if she had imagined it. "Mom, you—" I raised a hand. "Please, let me finish." She nodded, quickly, tears brimming again. "I've known about the debts," I said. "Not all the details at first, but enough to understand you were in deeper than you admitted. I didn't confront you then because I wanted to give you a chance to tell me yourself. When you didn't, I had to protect what your father and I built, but I never stopped wanting you safe." She buried her face in her hands. "I thought I could hide it, make it go away before you ever knew." I reached across the table and gently touched her wrist. "You don't need to hide anymore. The damage is real, but so is the chance to rebuild." She looked up, eyes searching mine. "How I don't even know where to start." I inhaled slowly, steadying my own voice. "With work, with humility. I'm establishing a foundation for auditory restoration, helping others gain the miracle I've been given. I want you to be part of it, not as a figurehead, not as someone coasting on my name, but with a modest role. Administrative work outreach, learning the discipline you've avoided for too long." For a long moment, she stared, torn between shame and relief. Then she whispered, "Yes, please, I'll do anything." Her acceptance carried no vanity, no resistance. It was the first genuine surrender I had heard from her in years. We sat in silence a while, drinking coffee, the ordinary act feeling extraordinary. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and opened a banking app. Her face drained of color. "What is it?" I asked. Her lips trembled. He took it. All of it. Darren drained my personal account before he left. Every cent. "I don't even have rent for next month." The words fell into the room like stones breaking glass. Claire pressed the phone to her chest, shaking. "I thought he at least left me that. I thought—" Her voice cracked, and she crumpled forward, sobbing. I moved from my chair to hers, placing my hand firmly on her shoulder. This time I didn't hold back. I let the warmth pass between us, the weight of my touch, saying what words could not. He's gone, Claire. And you're still here. That matters more than the money. She clung to my sleeve like she had when she was little and afraid of thunder. I don't know if I can do this, Mom. I stroked her hair. The gesture awkward from years of distance, but true. You can, and I will help not with endless money, but with guidance, with a chance to prove to yourself who you are without him. For the first time, she didn't argue. She only nodded, her tears soaking into my robe. And in that fragile moment, I felt the first thread of trust knitting itself back together, one stitch at a time. Mr. Hale came to the penthouse on a gray afternoon, his briefcase balanced neatly on the polished desk that had once been William's command post. Papers lay in tidy stacks before me, crisp with finality. He spoke in his steady, measured way, explaining each clause as though it were a brick in a wall, solid, protective, immovable. The bulk of your estate, he said, will be directed to the foundation. Its permanence ensures your work continues long after us. As for Claire, there will be a conditional trust. Funds released only if she demonstrates responsibility. Steady employment, completion of counseling, and no contact with Mr. Crail. I signed each page with careful strokes. Every letter of my name felt like a stone sinking into deep water. When Hale gathered the final document into his case, he gave a respectful nod. You've ensured both protection and fairness. It's a sound plan, Marion. Fairness. The word lingered like a weight. When the door closed behind him, I stayed in the study, staring at the portrait of William that hung above the mantel. His eyes, painted in soft oil strokes, seemed alive with that familiar mixture of pride and question. I've saved her. I whispered the words, breaking in my throat, but not without breaking her first. My fingers traced the edge of the desk. I remembered William's laugh, the way he had insisted that money was never the measure of our family, only the tool to support it. Yet here I was, using money like a whip and a shield, drawing boundaries with ink that cut as sharply as any blade. I wondered if he would have approved. Would he have been harsher, protecting the empire with no room for forgiveness? Or softer, letting Claire stumble again and again until she found her own footing? The silence of the room offered no answer, only the faint hum of the city outside. In the adjoining hall, I heard Claire's voice faintly as she spoke to Nina. Lighter, now humbler. She was learning the rhythm of a smaller life, the patience of rebuilding. I wanted to believe the trust was not a punishment, but a scaffold, a way for her to climb out of the ruin Darren had left. Still, guilt coiled inside me like a living thing. To save her, I had cut her down. To protect her, I had exposed her shame. Love and justice had tangled themselves so tightly that I could no longer tell them apart. I pressed my palm against William's portrait, closing my eyes. Forgive me, I murmured. I did what I thought would keep her alive. I just don't know if it will keep her whole. The snow outside thickened against the glass, the world muffled and white, as though holding its breath for what would come next. The snow receded slowly that year, but when spring finally arrived, the cottage bloomed with a life I had not seen in decades. Windows flung open to salt air roses budding along the path, children's laughter carrying from the lawn where volunteers set up tents for free hearing screenings. The cottage had been threatened, nearly stolen, yet here it was reborn as something larger than memory, a place for community, for second chances. I walked through the rooms with a quiet pride, hearing the scrape of chairs on the floor, the echo of piano notes as a student practiced for the evening arts event. Each sound reminded me why I had chosen this path. Silence turned into music, isolation transformed into connection. Claire moved among the guests with an energy I had almost forgotten she possessed. No designer coats now, no clipped superiority. She wore a simple blouse and trousers, hair pulled back, and greeted each visitor with genuine care. I watched her guide an elderly man toward the audiology table, kneel beside a child clutching his mother's hand, smile at strangers without calculation. Slowly, she was earning back respect not through entitlement, but through effort. When the day's work was done and the last guest had gone, we sat on the porch together, the wind chimes singing in the soft evening breeze. Claire's hands were smudged with ink from tallying forms, her blouse wrinkled, but her face glowed with something more than exhaustion. "This feels real," she said quietly, "like I'm part of something that matters. Thank you for letting me be here." I reached into my pocket and drew out the small velvet pouch I had carried for weeks. Her eyes widened as I placed it in her palm. Slowly, she pulled the drawstring open and tipped the contents into her hand, the old brass key to the cottage. Her breath caught. "Mom, you're giving this to me?" I met her gaze steadily. "Respect first, entry second. That's the rule of this house. You've started to earn it back. Now it's your turn to guard it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Instead, she closed her fingers around the key as though it were both anchor and promise. For the first time in years, I felt not just hope, but peace. The cottage stood strong behind us, no longer just mine, no longer just William's. It belonged to the future we were choosing to build, one brick, one word, one act of respect at a time. And as the chimes rang, I knew the hardest season had passed and a new one had begun. 6 months later, spring had ripened into a gentle summer, and the Leighton Center for Hearing and Arts opened its doors to the public. The hall was filled with families, patients, musicians, and neighbors, some seeking medical help, others drawn to the promise of community. Banners lined the stage, sunlight spilling across polished wood floors that smelled faintly of fresh varnish. I stood at the podium, heart steady, but full. The murmur of the crowd washed over me, a symphony I had once believed forever lost. In the front row, Claire sat with the staff, a lanyard around her neck instead of jewelry, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She was not there as my heir, but as someone who had earned her place by work and humility. For the first time in years, I saw pride in her eyes, and it was directed not at wealth, but at belonging. I adjusted the microphone, my voice carrying strong and clear. When I regained my hearing, I believed the miracle was sound, the rush of waves, the whisper of wind, the laughter I had missed. But what I truly recovered was the choice of who deserves to be heard. We build this center not only for those who seek voices restored, but for those who have long been silenced by circumstance, by fear, by neglect. Here, every voice will matter. Applause rose rich and full. I let it settle, then smiled at the sea of faces before me. For once, I felt not isolated by my silence, but joined by their sound. The foundation was no longer just mine, it belonged to all of us. That night back at the penthouse, I returned to William's study. The desk drawers were tidy now, ledgers closed, recordings labeled and sealed away. In the top drawer lay the velvet pouch, soft from use. I lifted the brass cottage key once more, its edges worn smooth by time. I placed it inside, turned the lock, and slid the drawer shut. The gesture felt final, not of secrecy, but of release. The only key that mattered now was not brass or velvet, but respect, the kind that could not be stolen, forged, or bought. I leaned back in William's chair, listening to the city hum beyond the glass. Respect had knocked at last, fragile and late, but real. And I knew when it came, I had chosen to open the door. Outline: Marion Leighton, 68, elegant widow in her penthouse by the coast. Opens with a disorienting phantom sound in her dream hearing waves and her late husband's voice. She wakes in shock. She has secretly scheduled a revolutionary implant surgery. Only her housekeeper, Nina Velasquez, knows. Immediately stakes Marion won't tell her daughter. Claire Dunwell, too. Twist early as she hides the appointment letter. She overhears Claire's voicemail outside her door. We need her signature this month. Don't let her delay again. Hook question. If your first glimpse of hearing back revealed betrayal, would you still share the miracle or bury it deeper? Marion reflects on 12 years of silence after gradual hearing loss. Flashback how William, her late husband, built their real estate fortune with her. Claire visits with her husband Darren Crail, pushing papers about taxes. Marion pretends confusion asks them to write. What Marion overhears Darren whispers. Get her to sign before the doctor calls again. Marion realizes they're rushing something hidden. Hook question. When you hear your child plotting, do you confront or keep pretending you're deaf at the Hamilton Clinic on the city's outskirts? Dr. Nathaniel Chen explains the procedure. Experimental neural implants. Marion keeps her mask of silence, but internally trembles with hope. During anesthesia countdown, she remembers Claire as a child, whispering bedtime secrets she never heard in full. Cliffhanger twist. She wakes up hearing muffled sounds, the drip of IV, rustle of sheets. The world is back. Hook question. If you regained your hearing, would you shout with joy or guard the silence as a weapon recovery at home? Nina is ecstatic, but Marion swears her to secrecy. Claire and Darren drop by. Marion removes hearing aids to fake silence. She writes her replies while overhearing them whisper about a transfer. Mini twist. She learns they've already shown her cottage to a realtor without permission. Hook question. What would you do if you discovered your family was selling your memories behind your back? Marion begins a secret ledger documenting every overheard detail. Hires discreet estate attorney Mr. Aldous Hale, but makes him promise silence. Hale finds Claire co-signed risky loans with Marion's artwork as collateral. Marion sees her daughter's desperation entangled with Darren's greed. Hook question. When betrayal wears your child's handwriting, do you expose it or try to save them? First, Marion escapes to the family cottage in Maine, hearing wind chimes for the first time in a decade. She finds Claire's notes in the guest book meetings with realtors. Neighbor recalls Claire boasting the sale is imminent. Marion cries silently, but steels herself. Hook question. Is a home still yours when your child already calls it theirs? Weekly family dinner at Marion's penthouse. She pretends deafness, forcing Claire and Darren to write oversimplified phrases. Meanwhile, she hears their whispered jabs. She's like a child. Easy target. Fake climax. Darren nearly tricks her into signing routine health consent that is actually close to power of attorney. Marion signs halfway, but Hale bursts in review later. They back off. Hook question. If you nearly fell for the trap, would you retreat or use it to bait them deeper? Nina confesses she's secretly been recording Darren's boasts about locking the POA Friday. Marion reveals her hearing recovery to Nina. They plan. Let the family believe Marion is still deaf while gathering evidence. Hook question. Who do you trust? More blood that betrays you or loyalty you hired Hale helps restructure Marion's estate, revoking POA, securing new trusts. Marion writes an emotional sealed letter to Claire, not to be read unless things collapse. Twist. She discovers Darren forged her late husband's old signature on loan papers. Hook question. Would you let a forgery destroy your husband's legacy or fight back in silence? At the cottage, Marion pretends not to hear while Claire brings a realtor. Marion suddenly speaks. This house is not for sale. Plays a recording Nina captured of Claire and Darren plotting. Family stunned, realtor embarrassed. Hook question. If caught red-handed, would family deny, confess, or strike back harder? Claire insists she was pressured by Darren. Tears, but Marion doesn't fully believe. Darren storms, threatens lawsuits. Marion sets conditions: repay, attend therapy, or face legal ruin. Hook question: can love survive when truth proves your child's hands aren't clean? Darren vanishes after lawsuits fail. Claire loses luxury life forced into a small flat. Marion continues her silence facade in public. She builds plans for a new foundation on hearing restoration. Hook question: when justice leaves your child stripped of wealth, do you extend a hand or let them fall? Claire shows up one night, eyes red. Mom, I need help, not money. First genuine moment between them in years. Marion listens silently, pretending still deaf, then records her daughter's confession. Loneliness, guilt, fear. Hook question: is forgiveness still forgiveness if you first demand proof? Marion reveals partial truth to Claire. She knew about the debts. Offers her a modest role at the new foundation. Claire humbles herself, accepts. Twist. Claire discovers Darren drained her personal account before leaving. Marion comforts her, finally touching her shoulder with warmth. Hook question: when the last rope snaps, can a mother's hand pull you back? Hale finalizes Marion's new will majority. To charity conditional trust funds for Claire. Marion struggles with guilt, protecting legacy versus punishing family. Emotional beat. She whispers to William's photo: I've saved her, but not without breaking her first. Hook question: does true justice come from punishment or the chance to grow again? Cottage reborn as a community hub for free hearing screenings and arts events. Claire works there, slowly earning back respect. Marion finally gives her the velvet pouch, the spare cottage key. Respect, first entry, second. Hook question: is trust a gift you give once or something you rebuild brick by brick? 6 months later. Marion inaugurates the Leighton Center for Hearing and Arts. Claire sits in the front row, not as an heir, but as staff proud of her mother. Marion's speech: I regained my hearing, but what I truly recovered was the choice of who deserves to be heard. Closing, Marion locks her drawer with the spare key, knowing respect is the only key that matters. Final hook to audience. When respect finally knocks, do you savor it alone or open the gate to the world?